Okay, yes. Anyway, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the Get Smart workshop. So, and also you're safe and warm and on the internet.
All right, thanks, Scarlett, and thanks for just generally inviting me to do this in the first place. I think we started talking about this, like last summer? So this has been in the works for a while, so I'm just super excited that there are a lot of awesome artists around here that are interested in getting this information. So welcome to the Law of Art. I just want to warn all of you that I have not given this presentation before, so I may stumble a little bit, but just know that the facts remain the same here. So, and I'm a little sick, so I hope that you can hear me just fine and can understand me, but I may have to take a cough break every now and again. So, so yeah, a little about me. And my internet connection also is a little so if I ever freeze, just as soon as I unfreeze and you hear me again, just somebody like wave and let me know. Because again, working at home and yeah. Yeah, and in a winter storm, and apparently it's icing again. So, all right. Try and organize this appropriately. Hang tight. That ought to do it. Okay. So, hi, I'm Sydney Rasch. I am an attorney here in Little Rock. I live in North Little Rock. I have a bunch of dogs and cats and a ridiculous husband, and started my own law firm with a couple of partners about 2 years ago. And I've been out of law school for about 4 years now and practicing. So I am super excited to get to merge some of my passions here. So I actually have a degree from Hendrix in studio art. I focused in sculpture and photography kind of towards the end. Here's a lovely photo of me sitting on one of my senior capstone pieces for my senior show. And this is our law firm's logo. And then this is just one of my photos. One of my favorite photos from my time as a professional photographer, which only recently came to an end at the end of 2022. I actually started my photography business in June of 2013, right after I graduated from Hendrix. Just kind of started, in the way we all do, like making stuff for friends, taking, family pictures for your, aunt and uncle, throwing it out in the yard sale pages back when those were a lot bigger, saying, hey, who needs photos? I'm doing them for $25 because that was apparently reasonable at the time, at least in my mind, but we all get our start in our own way. So, so yeah, I have been involved in the arts, in the community a lot as well, and am just super thrilled to work on this with the Arkansas Arts Council. So yeah, so that's me, and nothing in this presentation should be construed as legal advice. Can I just repeat it? There's the big disclaimer. That's a good legal word to know. Disclaimers, guys. If you ever do anything that might hurt somebody, or like, maybe you make a sculpture that has a bunch of pointy edges, on your artist tag, nothing wrong with a disclaimer. So you're here today because either you're a lawyer or you're an artist, and I assume most of you are artists. So, and if you've ever been paid to perform, you sold your work, anything like that, then you probably are a business owner and you may not even realize it. And so we're going to talk about how to get legal and all of the other considerations that you might need as an artist. I'm not going to profess to, know everything about this topic. For one thing, I'm a business attorney really at heart. I do a little bit of intellectual property, so I kind of have a bare bones coverage of that today. If you have deeper questions about intellectual property today that I can't answer, I can refer you to some really great people. One of my favorite IP attorneys is actually also a former photographer, Whitney Bauer. She's amazing. So just throwing that out there. So who is this workshop catered to, right? It's catered to all kinds of artists, visual artists, the obvious kind. Makers, though, I mean, we've got some amazing people making things on Etsy that, are maybe they're not protecting themselves. Writers, performing artists, even content creators. This can be really good for you. Definitely podcasters. I know we've got I've got a great podcaster friend on here. See you there. And even TikTok influencers. I mean, you don't think about it, but everything you create is your work, really. I mean, it's, every time you take a video, if you take a photo on your phone, even just, with portrait mode, that could be considered an artistic work. So, and definitely, of course, writers, bloggers, I mean, clearly, authors of printed works, but website designers, graphic designers, those are really, obviously important in this day and age. So one thing to note is this presentation is definitely direct. I'm going to move this down here. This seems to work better. One thing to note, this presentation is definitely catered more towards people who are, independently employed, or not employed, sorry, actually self-employed. Although, there are certain things in here that may be useful to you if you're, actually employed by, someone else as an artist, your W-2 employee. And I'll cover a couple of things that'll definitely be relevant to you. And if you're an independent contractor without an actual business entity, if you only, create work for others, for the businesses that you're contracted by, there will be a couple things in here that'll be applicable to you, but know that a good amount of the things in here won't apply to y'all. But I will say, as I've noted here, if you're an independent contractor, and you don't have an actual business entity, there could be things that you're, leaving on the table, so to speak. So it might be useful to create a formal business entity. So I'm going to start with business formation considerations. Whether or not forming a legal business is right for you involves a lot of questions, but there are a few different types, and you want to know, what's the right one for you and the type of work that you do, or the type of, the type of contracts that you complete. So the most simple one is a sole proprietorship. We have limited liability companies, LLCs. Corporations can be both for-profit or nonprofit, and partnerships. One quick note about partnerships is a partnership is not a formal legal entity unless you make it one. And I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to touch on partnerships a little bit. But there are formal partnerships that, agreements that you can create and file with the Secretary of State's office. Most of the time that's really for professional entities, like our law firm is an LLP, it's a limited liability partnership. But you may want to use that too. And if you have questions about that, we can talk about that after. So some pros and cons of different entity types. So I'm going to try and give a good broad overview here, and we'll talk a little bit about more of that. So the first big thing to know is if you are, selling your work, you're performing for money, but you don't have an actual business entity, that means you're a sole proprietorship. If you're taking cash under the table, you're definitely doing illegal things. It's called tax evasion, so we don't advise doing that. And we, definitely want to report our income, take out our expenses, and, do things the legal way. So yeah, sole proprietorship is going to be just pretty much anything like that. It's great if you're a solo business. There are no formal requirements. There's no, annual fees. You don't have to register with the state. You will have to get a business license, most likely. And if you are doing business under a different name than your own, so for instance, my photography business, I was a sole proprietorship, never formed an LLC or anything, although against my better judgment, but I kind of thought about that towards the end. But a DBA is a formal filing with your county, and we'll talk about that more. But again, the big con of a sole proprietorship is that you have no legal protections. So the main reason that you form an entity in all reality is to separate your personal assets from your business assets. Because if you get sued and you don't have an entity, that person that's suing you, if they win, they get a judgment against you and you have no protection, they're coming after your house, your car, your paycheck. So we just want to make sure we're all protected. So talking a little bit about partnerships down here, partnerships can be great for just working together on general projects. Maybe a good example was that comes to mind is a group photography show. So I did a couple of those. And we would not always charge for admission or anything, but some you would charge for admission. And so, and this is great too, like if you're in a band, and you only play together occasionally, and you take $10 at the door, at Vino's or whatever. That's if you agree to share in profits and losses, that means you have actually already formed a general partnership, and you probably don't even realize it. There's no actual formal requirements to form a general partnership. You don't register anything. If you are working under a different name, again, so let's say you're a band. I'm going to use my brother's band as an example here. They're a metal band. It's called Open Casket. I know, Casket with a K. They're pretty good if you like metal. But so there's 5 of them. They take $10 at the door and they buy equipment together. So they buy a new amp. They all take $500. They all contribute $500, $100 a piece to that amp. They make $500 at the door at Vino's. They split it up between them. That means they have a general partnership. The cons of a general partnership, of course, is that you have no legal protections. And a big problem that people tend to run into, going to continue using the band. So they write a song together. Song blows up, band gets big. One member leaves. That member says, "Oh, I wrote that song." Well, you wrote it all together. So copyright's owned by all of you. We'll talk about copyright a lot later. But long and short, partnership's great. But if you're really going to make money, always incorporate something, either create an LLC, corporation, yada, yada. You can contract with one another in a partnership. You can have a partnership agreement. That's your number one way to do that. Or you can actually allot, certain things to each partner. Or you can say, this intellectual property is owned by this person, and other things like that. So the big thing we're going to talk about today is going to be the limited liability company, LLC. There's 2 kinds of LLCs that you can create: a member managed LLC or manager managed LLC. We'll talk about that. The pro of an LLC is that it's a separate entity. You have much better personal protections. You have an LLC. Your LLC owns, your business property. Your LLC is the one entering into contracts. And when you do business as an LLC, so let's say I'm making a sculpture with, pointy edges, and somebody walks into that and I get sued, they're going to sue my LLC, not me. So that nobody's garnishing my paycheck when they get a judgment against me. I don't know that they would. I mean, come on, it's probably obvious that it's sharp. But the cons to LLCs, though, of course, is that you have formal requirements. So you file with the Secretary of State's office. You pay franchise taxes every year. It's not a lot. It's only about $150 a year. And there are other things too that you'll need to do, essentially just to kind of make sure that you're doing things the right way. Because just because you have an LLC doesn't mean you're getting the protections of an LLC if you're not doing business the right way. And we'll talk about that. And last big type of business entity that we're going to discuss is corporations. So most people don't need a corporation, but a corporation can be really useful for some kinds of businesses. Certainly, if you are doing anything in the nonprofit world, let's say you're an artist and you want to create a foundation for kids to do art, in an after-school program or something, you're probably going to want to do a nonprofit there. And that's going to be really, really useful. And the only way to have a nonprofit entity is by forming a domestic nonprofit corporation. And then, of course, if you choose to go the nonprofit route, then you file with the IRS for a 501c3 status. And that takes some time. And we're not going to get into that today. But if you have questions about that, I can definitely help. So the big con, of course, to corporations is that it has even more formal requirements than an LLC. And it's just, again, it's not necessary for most people. Oh, that's awesome, Scarlett. See, that's good. Arkansas Arts Council's right there getting it. So we're going to talk more about LLCs because, again, for most people, LLC is going to be the best thing that you can do for yourself to protect you and protect your family. So it is works best for most for-profit businesses. Again, you cannot have a nonprofit business as an LLC. I've had people come to me, they're like, oh, I have this awesome LLC. We're doing these great things. How do I make it a nonprofit? Well, we got to shut it down. Sorry. So two kinds of LLCs. So we've member managed and manager managed. So when you have a multi-member LLC, that is, you have 2 or more people that have formed this business. A member managed is going to be your best way to do it, unless, of course, you have, we call them silent partners, basically people that are, wanting to be part of the business. They're investing, but maybe you're the one making the work, you're creating, the product. And generally, if you have one person that's doing all of the things, I'm still going to say, let's do a manager managed LLC. But again, for most people, member managed is going to be your best choice for a multi-member. And you're going to want to have an operating agreement. I'm going to get into that in the next slide. But essentially an operating agreement is a contract between y'all that, protects everybody and says, this is what this person does, this is what this person does, and so on. But a manager managed LLC, again, is better, for a single member LLC because there's no operating agreement needed. There's no other formal requirement to do it. I will note down here a little sidebar, another fun lawyer word. If you do frequently work for other businesses, they may prefer that you be a corporation, because corporation to corporation, you don't have to actually issue a 1099 for that person. So if somebody says, hey, it would be much better if you were a corporation, we could hire you more, that's probably why. But again, another consideration for choosing your entity type. To actually form your entity, in whatever entity you decide on, if an LLC or a corporation, you go to sos.arkansas.gov and you can do it entirely online. The LLC filing is only $45, and again, it's $150 a year. Franchise taxes do have to be paid anytime between January 1 and March 15th of each year. Theoretically, they send you an email to remind you, but don't count on that. You just have to remember. Sometimes they'll send a letter, but you know how the mail is these days. And I'm going to walk you through that here in just a second. In order to form your entity, you need to know a couple things in advance. You need a registered agent, which can be you, or it can be someone else or a company. Our law firm, we're a registered agent for a lot of the businesses that I've formed over the years. But I'm my own registered agent for the law firm entity itself. So that is the person that will be served if you ever get sued. So you want to make sure that it's somebody, and address that you give is an address that you're going to receive mail at. You don't want it to be, maybe you want it to be your parents' address because mom and dad's address is always going to be there, and maybe you move from apartment to apartment all the time, and that's fine. Another choice again is to hire a registered agent company. There's a couple of those here in Little Rock. There's a couple in the Northwest Arkansas area, and they will accept any paperwork on your behalf, and usually they notify you depending on what you sign up for, maybe email or phone. And I think those services in general are relatively inexpensive because they kind of take a bet that you're probably not going to get sued a lot. So the other thing to note is you have to choose where is your principal place of business. So this is going to be the address that again is publicly available as well. And if you want to put your home address, that's fine. Most people don't really have another address to do. It can't be a PO box. So you have to actually choose a physical location. So just know that that address will be publicly available as well. I'm going to take us to, assuming my link works, sos.arkansas.gov, just a quick walkthrough. If it works. Stop me if you've heard this. All right, so we are at sos.arkansas.gov, which is a place for all things business. So you're going to want to go to business services. And when you go to new businesses, they'll walk you through it. So you can actually download this Doing Business in Arkansas booklet. It's sort of helpful. You can file your new entity online right here. You can do paper forms. So if you are helping somebody that's maybe a little less tech savvy or doesn't have access to the internet, you can get them the paper forms this way. And I'm going to talk a bit more about name availability in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it since we're already here. For name availability, you go to the business entity search. And so you're going to want to search both here and here. Actually, you know what? I'll get back to that. So to create your business, so we're going to go to new business filings. And we're going to click right here. And you can choose any of these things. But again, we're going to start to form a fake LLC. So in order to form an LLC, all you have to do is do the certificate of organization for a domestic LLC right here. If you aren't sure about forming your entity yet and you want to just reserve a name, you can do that. You can also have a fictitious name. So we'll talk about DBAs more in a minute. And it's more or less a DBA is a fictitious name, but doing business as. So you can have an LLC that is named, Sydney Rasch Enterprises, and then doing business as Art Photography by Sydney Rasch. And you do have to register that. So if you, let's say, have multiple businesses and multiple artistic endeavors, and you want to do business under different names, because maybe you have an Etsy shop and you have a photography business, right? So maybe you want those two entity names, but you can do it under one entity. So but you just have to, again, reserve your fictitious name right here after your LLC is already created. So in order to form it, you just click here and you start form. And it'll automatically select your filing act for you. You enter your company name, whatever you choose. It does have to have the word LLC in it. And you just enter in all of your information here, put in your registered agent, your organizer and your officers. I think somebody needs to mute themselves. Please be sure you're muted. Thank you. So your organizer and your officers, it can be you. If it's a single member LLC, every single one of these can be you. You can be you're the organizer, you're the submitter, and you're definitely going to be the annual franchise tax report contact information. And theoretically, the email address you put here is where you should get the reminder every year. But again, sometimes it goes to junk. I don't know. Maybe I've just missed them. And then that's all you do. You sign right here by typing your name and you click submit. It'll go through, it'll ask you if you want to upload your own articles of formation. You don't have to do that. You pretty much just have to click through all the way until you pay $45 after this point. So I see a hand raise.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat.
I'm sorry, I missed the chat when I switched to the internet.
Yeah, that's okay. Can the address be changed to a registered agent after the LLC has been created?
Yes, you can change your registered agent at any time. So I'll actually back out and I'll show you.
They also wanted to know, can the fictitious name have symbols? Like,
can it what?
Can they have symbols like hashtags or @ signs or anything? Can the name itself?
No.
I would assume. Oh no. Okay. I know nothing.
Excuse me. But if that's like an identifying mark that you use for your business, that might be something you want to trademark, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for instance, I have a good example. At the corner, the cute little brunch place downtown, I just love that place. Their logo is the @ sign, but their name is still legally it's @18. So like if you use a like an @ sign or a hashtag, if the word hashtag is part of your name, if it's like hashtag Sydney Rasch, that's your business name, you're going to want to spell it out in your actual LLC name or your fictitious name. But you can, use it as the actual symbol. So, but again, you might want to look into other things there. So real quick, so I'm going to go back to this. So notice a change of registered agent right here. You can click this and you can do a quick little form and change that at any time. And then this is going to be your fictitious name filing. So once you've clicked through and you've formed your LLC, The Secretary of State does typically take a day or two, sometimes a little bit more, to get back to you to confirm everything. Depending on their staffing availability, because it is all reviewed by a human and approved. So once you've actually been approved, you'll get an email and you'll get your certificate of organization of your LLC, and you'll get a filing number. And that filing number, when you search for your entity, you'll see that in a minute. And you can search here. So when you apply for a fictitious name, you just input your filing number for your LLC, and then you go through with the form. And it's all very simple. It takes less than 5 minutes. So pretty good stuff. So I'm going to click back to the presentation here. My slow internet. Bear with me. Okay. So the next big thing you need to know about having an LLC with more than one member is definitely an operating agreement. And again, also with a partnership. You know, if it's like a one-off group photography show, like some of the things that I've done where we don't take any money at the door. The only money you might make is from the sales of your individual works. There is no real need to have a partnership agreement unless, for instance, maybe you're paying for the space to host it. And that's going to definitely invite, at least something in writing agreeing, who's paying for it? Do we get reimbursed for that out of sales from other people? Are there any other considerations to have?
Would a gallery be that way? Like most of the galleries do take a commission. They would probably have a contract, or
Typically, I would say some galleries definitely are going to have you sign a contract. Some won't. And maybe most won't. It really depends. I mean, definitely like anything associated with the Arts Council or like the Butler Center. I mean, any, state-owned things, larger entities, Clinton Center. Yeah, you're definitely going to sign a contract. And they're, for a commission on it. But again, smaller, like individually owned galleries are not necessarily going to have you sign something. They're just going to say, well, hey, what'd you make at the end of the night? Pass over the cash. So, but again, that might be something you want to consider, because if they don't ask for a contract, you might want one, because you don't want people to change the terms on you later. As long as you have it in writing, you're probably okay, just to make sure that's very clear. We have, whenever we, it comes time, where people get in disputes and we're in court, a text message that says all of the terms of the agreement and they say, okay, that's almost as good as a written contract. Now, it's not going to have all of the same protections. You're going to be missing out on a lot of, other things. And there may be other things that could affect what you've said in your text messages, right? But at the end of the day, that's probably going to protect you most of the time. And so if it's a relatively small thing or a one-off thing, you're probably okay. So, but operating agreements. So for an actual LLC with multiple members, you're going to want an operating agreement, especially, again, going to keep using the band as my brother brought in like 2 amps and a couple of guitars. And, one of the other members brought in his drum kit, and, another one brought in, a stack, a double stack, I guess is what they call that. And essentially they're like, okay, well, we're all going to use this. So now we've got a partnership and we have partnership property. We're currently working on their partnership agreement. So everybody's legit and we're forming them in LLC at some point soon, because there's a lot going on there. But all this to say, the individual things you bring into the business, those need to be accounted for in the agreement, right? So we're looking at, I brought in that we call it, it's capital. That's a word you might hear. And so, X person brought this, I brought this. If we ever dissolve the partnership or we dissolve the LLC, this person gets to keep this person gets to keep this. Because otherwise, if you dissolve an LLC with no agreement, technically everybody's entitled to an equal share of whatever, even if I brought in 90% of the property. They would have a legal argument to say, well, I'm entitled to half of that if there's two of us. So another big important thing to consider in your operating agreement is how to split profits and losses. If it's not going to be 50-50 or an equal split, one person may be, again, doing the majority of the work, whereas one person is providing the majority of the capital. Again, whether that's equipment, it's money, it's them, paying for a space for you to work in for a while. I mean, whatever it is, you need to spell it out if it's not going to be equal. Another really important consideration is, especially if you're bringing in a lot of money over time, if your business grows and becomes, very profitable, a pre or post nup clause if any partner or member is married, because otherwise, if that person gets divorced, their spouse might just have a claim to part of your business, and that is the last thing that you want to ever deal with. Trust me, I'm a divorce lawyer too. So, and like, really the last big thing is, how things will be split if you decide to dissolve your business partnership. Sometimes people leave too. You want to have a buyout clause. Again, say I brought in 90% of the equipment, and I have a partner. We're 50-50 owners in this LLC. Let's say I want out. Maybe I don't want my stuff back, but I also want to be compensated for that. My stuff that I brought is worth $10,000, right? And it's been 5 years. So we've been using it for 5 years. I'm just throwing out numbers. But say I have $10,000. We've been using it for 5 years. It's depreciated. It's not worth as much as it was when we formed this business, right? But it's still worth something. And especially, if I don't want it and you want to keep it and keep using it, you're going to need to pay me some money. And so putting it in your operating agreement really from the very beginning and saying, hey, over time, this is what we'll pay you as a buyout. You can even break it down by year. You don't have to. You can say, a certain percentage, each year is in devaluation. You don't even have to do that. You can also just say, hey, this is the amount we're going to pay to buy you out no matter what. You can really do it any way you want. That's kind of the beauty of it. Operating agreements are just a contract. Contracts, as long as there's nothing illegal about it, and you've done everything the right way, it's probably going to hold up. So you can contract for about anything. You can't contract to commit a crime. You can't contract, well, there's a couple of exceptions, but generally you can contract for about however you want to split it, and it's going to hold up. So the last big thing on your operating agreement is kind of what I was mentioning before. So your intellectual property you create as business partners. So again, say I wrote the song, but we played it all together. I leave, I'm not going to own that copyright unless that operating agreement says I own that copyright. Or we execute an additional contract later that says I own that copyright. So know that, and that's really important to know. So another big thing is a business license. So whatever kind of entity you have, whether you have a sole proprietorship or an LLC, corporation, whatever, you probably need a business license if you're going to do business in Arkansas, if you're going to do business in a county or city. If you're just, trying to, I can't even think of a good reason. No, you need a business license. You can get a business license from your city. And typically you're going to get it in the city in which you live. And of course, that's going to differ if, for instance, like me, I live in North Little Rock. My business is in Little Rock. We have a brick and mortar location in downtown. So we have a business license with the city of Little Rock and not with the city of North Little Rock. However, with my photography business, I was a sole proprietor. I had a business license with the city of North Little Rock where I live. And, oh, I just saw that, Scarlett. I have had a business license with the city of North Little Rock where I live, even though I do business did business in every county in the state, and did a lot of business in other states sometimes too, but I don't have to have a business license in every place that I operate, just in my main principal place of business. So another important thing to know, especially if you are a sole proprietorship, this is really the only time this is going to come up, right? Is to file for a DBA. So again, DBA, doing business as, it's actually a filing with your county. Pulaski is really, really easy because everything's online, but if you live in another county, they may have the forms available online. You just may not be able to submit them online, or you may need to call your county clerk's office, but that's going to be where you go, is your county clerk. Scarlett has your hand raised.
Can you move a DBA? Like if you live in well, if you live in Faulkner County and you move to Pulaski County, can you change the address?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The main thing you're going to want to do is just go ahead and register. I mean, you're just going to need to re-register with Pulaski, right? If you move from Faulkner to Pulaski, and then make sure that you cancel your DBA with Faulkner. Now, your only real consideration there is, if you have a business name that is not, maybe it's kind of generic. Someone in Pulaski County already has your business name and you don't have a trademark on it. You have, maybe you don't have an LLC, so there's no way anybody knows. Then you're going to run into some problems. And you may run into problems anyway, because if you're both operating a business with the same name, eventually you're probably going to get confused and somebody's going to want to try to force the other one to change their name. And then that's where we get into trademark litigation. And again, I don't do that for lots of reasons. But anyway, that's going to be your general rule. And yeah, so if you are just making art under your own name, maybe I'm a painter and I sell paintings and I sign my name and I don't have a business name of any kind. I'm just a sole proprietor doing my thing. You don't need a DBA to do business under your own name. So only if you're doing business under a name that's not yours. Although again, Art Photography by Sydney Rasch having been my photography business name, it is not just Sydney Rasch. So I had a DBA for the whole name. Another important point is that you will have to do commercial property tax filings, most likely, once you register your DBA. And I want to warn everybody that if you don't register your DBA and you piss somebody off and they report you, they're going to hit you with like 3 years of commercial property tax filings or however many years you've been doing business. And they're going to estimate what you owe. And then you're going to have to come up with what you actually owe. And they're still going to hit you with penalties and blah, blah, blah. I had a client like that recently. And you really don't want that, especially if you're doing something that where you're selling goods and you have sales tax charges and somebody reports you for not paying sales tax, you're in a world of hurt for a while. We'll talk about that more. Okay. So banking and tax considerations. This is the most important thing you need to know about, especially with an LLC or corporation. You have to actually keep the finances separate in order to actually get the protections of the LLC or corporation. So again, we're keeping our personal finances separate from our business finances. I think this is just best practice for anybody that's doing any kind of business, whatever it is to have a separate bank account where you take in money and you spend your expenses only out of that account. Now, that's not going to work for everybody because sometimes we have, we need to make an investment, right? And so maybe we need credit, maybe we need a credit card, and maybe we buy something on our personal credit card and we write it off, later. I am not a CPA, and I'm going to advise you all to talk to a CPA or an accountant about these kinds of issues and more deeply. But in general, this is just a good rule of thumb. Put money in, take the money out, and then at the end of the year, you're going to have a pretty good profit and loss statement, just like that. So if you don't do that and you have an LLC or a corporation and you intermingle your finances, let's say you're spending your LLC money on personal things. If you get sued, somebody's going to get a hold of your bank records. They're going to say, well, you didn't actually, do things the right way. You commingled your funds so much that we can't tell the difference between you and your LLC. So sorry, but your LLC is not going to protect you from anything. And I'm going to garnish your personal paycheck for this money you owe me. And again, that's not just if you get sued for, random negligence. I mean, if you owe somebody money, I mean, again, if you owe somebody money personally and you have assets in your LLC and you're intermingling, they're going to get a hold of your personal stuff and your business stuff. Even if you hold all your money in your LLC, if you're intermingling, there's really no point, because you've not done things the right way. So okay, so sales tax. This is really important. If you sell anything, whether it's digital, print, a physical piece of art, then you need to pay sales tax. If you are a musician and you only get money from performances, you don't pay sales tax. But let's say you have an EP, you have an album that you sell at your concerts, or you sell t-shirts with your name on them or your band's name, you're technically by law required to pay sales tax on that. Is anybody gonna go and like check behind every band that plays at Vino selling merch? I mean, probably not, but they could. So my advice is always going to be do things the right way. And if you get caught, you might get stuck with a lot of penalties and interest, especially if you do it for a long time. And then if you go piss somebody off and they report you, because that's usually how it happens. It's kind of ridiculous, but I think we all know the politics of the art world. So one thing that this is a good personal story of mine. I did not know the first 2 years that I was a photographer that I had to pay sales tax. This was before I was a lawyer, or before I went to law school. And so I discovered, and luckily it wasn't because I pissed somebody off and they reported me. I discovered on my own and decided, crap, I better get this done the right way. So 3 years in, I filed 3 years of sales tax reports, because I was honest and I was like, this is my mistake. They waived all the penalties and most of the interest. I just had to pay everything that was actually due, plus just like a little bit on top of that. And of course, because it was my first couple of years in business, I think I made $500 or $600 my first year. So it wasn't a lot. And so if you're not doing it now and you just, contact the DFNA, that's the people you pay your state taxes to, they handle sales tax as well. If you go to them and you say, I really didn't know, I'm sorry, like I want to get, caught up and let me pay what I owe, they're gonna be pretty nice. So if you're in that boat, don't freak out too much. In order to pay sales tax, you go to this website right here. I am not going to walk you through this, but again, I will provide these slides, but it is atap.arkansas.gov. You register for a sales tax filing number, and you can pay monthly, but if you only make under a certain amount, they changed it recently, you can also pay quarterly. Scarlett?
Would tickets to an art class be a taxable sale?
Probably not, because it's just a service, not no. So that's the big difference. So it's a good versus a service. So if you sell a product, that's a good, and you probably have to pay sales tax on it. In fact, I'm going to guarantee you have to pay sales tax on it. When in doubt, there is a fantastically complex booklet available on the DFNA's website. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's basically, should I pay sales tax or not? And we'll walk you through your exact type of business and tell you yes or no. You can always call. So for a photographer, taking the pictures is not taxable, but the actual pictures are, right? So if you are a photographer, or again, any kind of business owner that has, say, so we have a session fee. So photographers, right? We have a session fee, and some of us have a session fee, and that includes your digitals. So the entire amount is going to be taxable for sales tax. And you can either add sales tax or, include it in, and that's a CPA question that I'm not going to get into. But you can always just add your sales tax on top of it, just like when you buy something at Walmart. But if you are a photographer that separates a session fee from prints and products or digitals, and it can't be too different, if you're charging $500 for your session fee and $10 per, digital per product, you're going to get slapped for that at some point. Don't do that. But let's say your session fee is $150 and you do sales, maybe your average sale is $500, you're going to pay sales tax on that $500 for the products that you sell. But again, if you include any digitals, you're pretty much going to have to pay sales tax on the whole session fee. So, let me see, did I miss any questions? Okay, so let's see. Income tax, CPA considerations. Again, talk to a CPA, talk to an accountant. This is just general info. But keep track of your expenses. Right, your expenses, again, if you're doing everything right and you're reporting your income and you're reporting your expenses. So anything you spend, it's not going to reduce. The important thing to know is that it's not going to reduce the tax you owe, like say you are going to owe $1,000 and I spent $1,000 on business property. You're still going to owe money. You're just going to owe like a percentage amount less. So your expenses actually, so we have your gross income here, and then your expenses are going to come off the top of that. And then once your expenses come off, all that's left here, this is the amount you're taxed on. So that's really the most important thing. It's gross income, expenses, adjusted gross income, and then there's your tax. So make sure that you keep track of everything, even small things you don't think about, because it can help in the end. Depreciation versus expensing. So expensing meaning you write off the entire amount. So I buy a camera. Cameras are expensive. I spent $2,000 on a camera. I can either choose to expense that and immediately write off that whole amount, or I can take that $2,000 as a tax benefit over time and depreciate it. So I get a little bit of that every year off of my taxable income. Again, talk to a CPA if you're not sure, but this is just good to know. And then commercial personal property taxes, talked about that a little bit. If you are registered with your county, you're gonna need to do that every year. Okay, so on to choosing a name for your business. I showed y'all the business entity search a little bit earlier. So I'll hop back to that in a second. And the other thing to note is if you are planning to really turn your business into something big, or think there's any chance it's gonna, be more than just like a hobby business, right? I mean, a lot of us artists are hobbyists. We occasionally sell something and we're like, oh, yay, I made money. And it's, it's fine and it's wonderful. But if this is, something that you're really planning on, taking and hoping it takes off, you might want to look into a trademark. The worst thing that can happen is you start to get big and then you find out that someone else already has your name and they sue you to change it because they already have a trademark. So your best bet is to check first. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So, and obviously you can always Google it. Google is your friend, guys. Google is your friend. So definitely a domain name search. I mean, literally just type in your business every which way you can think of into the domain search, right? But so this is the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So most of us are never going to even have to know what a patent is, but I'm just going to briefly explain. A patent is going to be on an idea. It's going to be on, like a medical device. Artists generally are not going to need to worry about patents. They're very expensive, and there's only like 5 lawyers in Arkansas who do it, because we have to pass a whole separate bar exam to get licensed to do patent law. So trademarks. So you can search the trademark database right here. The main thing is that there are a couple of there are different categories of trademarks. So this is the biggest thing. But your basic thing to start with is going to be your basic word mark search. You can also trademark things like logos. I kind of mentioned that earlier. But so over here we've got, plural and singular, live and dead. You want to pretty much search everything. So your automatic first thing you see here is going to be search everything. So somebody want to toss out their business name? Let's make this interactive, guys. Toss out your business name and let's see if there's a trademark on it, if you're feeling lucky. I'm not seeing the chat, so anybody? Okay.
Oh, Monster Boy lives. Sorry, I was thinking really hard. Monster Boy lives, Veronica says. Oh, Wandering Oaks, Motherhood and Birth.
I was about to pick on you, Brittany. Okay, let's try both. I was about to pick on you, Brittany, and just say Wandering Oaks. So, and then Monster Boy lives is Monster Boy. It's one word, right? And it's Monster Boy lives. Okay. All right. Let's try both. All right. So let's try Wandering Oaks. So, because that's like the main part of the name, and I'm picking on Brittany because I love you, but I know that's like the main part, right? So we would want to make sure that that particular part is not trademarked. So we're just going to type that in and we're going to hit submit query.
It might be. I think it's like a trailer park somewhere.
No test records were found. No records found. No one has a trademark on that. That's already a good sign. So you're safe, Britt.
Very excited.
So let's try Monster Boy lives. Great. No records. You're safe. So I'm going to search something that I know is trademarked. So this is a phrase, and this came up when I was running, I ran a Secretary of State campaign as the campaign manager last year for Josh Price. Sorry if y'all know too much about that or anything, but I remember we came up with a campaign slogan like Price is Right. So that's been trademarked a lot of times, clearly. Some of them are live, some are dead. So this is a good example. The TV show clearly hasn't trademarked, y'all. Just gonna make sure that's really obvious. But because we weren't a TV show, we were a political campaign. Technically, if they didn't have it trademarked in a certain category, we might still be able to use it as like a catchphrase for the campaign, right? Without getting angry lawyer letters from their legal team about violating their trademark, because that's really what's going to happen. They're going to send you letters first, and then they're going to say, hey, change your name voluntarily so we don't have to sue you. But for instance, so Price is Right. So it says it's live over here. The ones that say dead, that means just that they're dead. They're not valid anymore. Might be able to take that name without any problems. But let's click on the first one. And I'll show you kind of what it looks like. And it'll show you the categories. Because you may have the same name as another business, but if they don't have it trademarked in the same category as you, then you might still be okay. Well, it's not loading. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides because I don't know how long this might take, but you get the idea. And again, not an intellectual property lawyer.
Uh-oh.
I'm back.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. My internet does do that from time to time. Please excuse my messy background. If you lose me again, I will come right back, I swear. Okay, I'm gonna reshare. All right, so on to the next one. Okay, so intellectual property generally. So we talked about trademarks a little bit, but pretty much anything you create is your intellectual property. And you need to protect it because at the end of the day, somebody else comes up with the same thing 3 years from now and they trademark it first or register their copyright first. It's going to be really hard for you to ever prove that you had it first. So protect yourself. And a note, again, just gonna bring this back up. Be very careful when creating intellectual property with others and sharing your intellectual property with others, because people are assholes and they will steal your idea. Not only will they steal your idea, they will profit off your idea and never give you anything because they registered it first. I have a client right now who is an artist and came up with a fantastic idea and is currently in the middle of a very frustrating legal battle over this fantastic idea that she came up with another person who went off the deep end just a bit, frankly, and is now trying to claim that it's hers. And it's really bad because she has more money than this other person does to fight. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, that is the world we live in. And if you don't have the money to fight it, you might get screwed anyway. So just protect yourself from the very beginning and have a contract. Oops. Nope. Let's go back. Okay. Now, how do you protect your intellectual property? You have a contract. Oh, and if you're producing visual art, I didn't finish this slide. I meant to make that bigger, apparently. Sign your work and number it if it's like a multi, like a print with multi pieces. And then trademark and then copyright. So let's talk about copyright, because this is really the most important thing that you need to know, because this applies really to everybody who makes anything in the art world. So this is long, I won't read this all, but basically a copyright is a form of protection that's actually authorized by law. It keeps others from being able to reproduce your work. For photographers, it's the thing we always say, like, hey, you can't edit my work. Like, please don't slap a filter on that and put it on Instagram because you've just violated my copyright. I see that face. So essentially, it covers anything that you make that was your original idea, or if it's enough different from someone else's idea. I'm going to throw out Andy Warhol, right? So Andy Warhol made paintings of people that were photographed, right? I mean, the Marilyn Monroe photo. I have a really interesting slide about this later. But I mean, it has to be different enough from someone else's idea to be your individual idea, right? But long and short, if you made it and it's your idea, you already have a copyright. It begins from the time the work is created in a fixed, tangible form. And tangible meaning, I mean, typically that means, something you can touch. But again, if you can, it's music, you can hear it. If you can see it, whatever it is, I can sense it with one of my 5 senses. That's how that actually works. So it vests immediately. So I take a photo, I own the copyright. Nobody else can take that from me. When you sell your work, you still own the copyright. Again, with photographers, I take photos for a family, I give them the images, I give them a right to print for personal use. I don't transfer the copyright to them. So they can't take that. Let's say this is a groomsman photo that I get requested a lot when I did a lot of weddings, y'all. But the groomsmen, they would have the funny socks. And so we would do the photo of, all the groomsmen's feet, in a picture with them like pulling up their pant leg to see all their funny different socks. So I give you that photo, I give you a print release for personal use. You can't go back and sell that photo to the manufacturer of those socks and then use it for a marketing campaign, because then you're violating my copyright. I know it's kind of a silly example, but I think you'll get the point. You can release a copyright with an explicit contract. But most of the time you don't have to release your copyright. Especially with, I think, any, photography, client, they think, oh, I need a copyright release in order to print them. No, you don't. You just need permission for me to print it. With selling your work to somebody, say you're a painter or a sculptor, you're selling your physical work to somebody. I've sold physical works to people too. That elephant in the first photo, I sold that to Professor. I was pretty excited about it. But I'm not giving him my copyright. I'm not giving him the release to now sell my idea to Pottery Barn to create tiny little elephants. You can't do that. That's violating my copyright. Just because I sold you the work doesn't mean that you own the right to reproduce it. I'm sorry if I missed a question here. Okay, answered it. Great. Okay, and if somebody asks you to release a copyright and it's not something that you're familiar with, and it's very obvious why they might need it, because again, say you're taking photos, you're being hired to shoot photos for a marketing campaign, for instance, or you're being hired to design a logo for a business, right? Clearly they are going to reproduce that and they are going to put it on things and possibly profit off of it. If you're not sure, talk to a lawyer. That's your best answer always. So something really important to note, if somebody hires you to make it, because again, like a logo, for instance, or say you're working for, for a company, you're doing graphic design for them. So if you're hired to make the work, or for instance, you're hired to paint a portrait of somebody, and and that's, well, yeah, you're hired to paint a portrait of somebody, but they're paying you in order to do it. That copyright is not attached to you. It's a work for hire, it's made for hire. The copyright is actually going to be owned by the person who's hired you to make it 95% of the time. There are going to be a few small exceptions to that. I'm not going to get into that here because again, I'm not an IP attorney. But if you're not sure, ask one. And you cannot reproduce that, right? So sometimes there are good exceptions to this where you negotiate that as part of your contract. And don't be afraid to do this, because a lot of people will never think to ask, and most companies aren't going to care. So for instance, like say a company hires you to create a work for them, they hire you to paint, let's say they hire you to paint a mural in their lobby. Okay, so you paint the mural in the lobby, they're going to own the copyright, you've made it for them. But what you can negotiate in your contract is the right to continue to use it, say for your portfolio, or for instance, you could negotiate the right to create prints of that mural or reproduce them in any capacity, because a lot of places aren't going to care. But if you do it without getting permission first, and then somebody comes along and says, hey, I don't like that, and you don't have anything, you might be screwed. So don't do that. Just negotiate everything on the front end and make sure that you're covering yourself, because if you might want to use it, you might want to just ask. Oh yeah, that's a really good point, Veronica. Yeah, if you're writing a song for somebody, that's the thing. And writing songs is probably going to be a little bit different too, because if you're, writing, let's say you're writing a jingle. If you're writing a jingle for a company to use on the radio, yeah, they're going to keep that copyright, right? So, but if you're just writing, I don't know, I can't think of another good example, but good considerations there. Okay, so I mentioned that the best way to protect yourself on the front end is to register your work. Now, I'm not saying that it's functional or reasonable, practical at all to register every single photo you take if you're a photographer, or register every single painting. However, you may want to, and that is the best way to protect yourself on the front end. You can register it at www.copyright.gov. I'm not going to walk you through that just in the interest of time. And again, not an IP lawyer, but you can do it yourself. It's actually really easy. And the main thing is, if there's any chance that, it might be something that you want to protect long-term, do it now before somebody else comes and says, hey, I already got that copyright. So again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you this, but there was a recent lawsuit against Andy Warhol's estate by Prince's estate. Scarlett's shaking her head like she's seen this, but yeah, so there's a very famous photo of Prince that they recreated and in that style, and the photographer is and the estate of Prince actually is suing, and I think they won because it was considered too original. So you want to be really careful again when you're using someone else's work as your work. It's one thing to sample. I had a client that sampled an audio from a television show in a song that they wrote and performed publicly, and it took about a month and a half for someone from that television show for it to get back to them and them to get a cease and desist. So hey, there's another good thing to avoid. But sampling can be okay, but not always. Yes, music does have a lot of that, absolutely. Oh, another good example that comes to mind, Miley Cyrus's new song Flowers. Have y'all heard that? Because it's pretty banging. But like part of because it kind of has that it kind of samples that Bruno Mars song a little bit, but it's different enough. It's different enough. Like you kind of feel it, but it's different enough. Okay, definitely banging. Yep. Okay. I'm just going to briefly mention this. So if you want to make your work public domain, you can do that if you want people to be able to buy and sell. So number one thing that comes to mind for me is a photographer that creates images that they want, in the public commons, for people to be able to buy and sell, just to use in their own, things. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh my gosh. Stock photography. There it is. So stock photography, if you, if you want to do things like that, or you can do that, and Creative Commons is the best place to do that. So, and on sampling and using others' work, parody is a big one. Don't do it unless you're really sure or you have someone's permission, because people don't really like when you make fun of their work. But if it's different enough, you might be okay. If you're not sure, again, talk to a lawyer. Satire, definitely. Yeah, Weird Al, great. Weird Al always asks first. Exactly, Scarlett. So, all right. So a little bit back on trademark. I think I put this slide in the wrong spot, but meant to talk about this earlier, but what you can trademark: names, logos, catchphrases, trademarked in different categories. Oh, here's my bad example. If you've ever heard of like Abstract Title Company, but maybe you also want to have a publishing company that's called Abstract Titles. So you can have it in different categories, say they're both copyright, both trademarked. Scarlett has her hand raised.
Again, I'm sorry. Amy has a question in there, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you answer it. So, if any individual commissions a painting, would they legally be able to make and sell reproductions of the painting?
So that's a complicated question, because again, they're probably going to own the copyright. So the answer is probably, but maybe not. It depends on how individual it was and what the purpose of the painting was. Again, say you made a painting in order for a graphic designer to make a logo off of it. Like clearly they're going to have the right to do that. But again, at the end of the day, you're going to just want a written contract saying exactly what everybody can and can't do with that work. Because otherwise it's kind of a free for all. And there's, again, I don't profess to be an IP attorney. So the safest bet is to have a written contract anytime you make a work for somebody, unless it's either you don't care and you're like, cool, do whatever you want, or it's, such a small amount of money, it's not worth it. You're welcome. So, okay, on to the next. So contracts. So that leads us right into I think, the most important part of my presentation. If you can hire a lawyer to write your contracts, you should, because that's just going to be, you're just going to get it for a better product than trying to do it yourself, especially if it's really, really complicated. Again, operating agreements, complex copyright releases. Most of us have templates. It really doesn't take that long, and it probably is less expensive than you think it is. I'd say most people that hire me to write and review contracts spend less than $500. So, however, if you can't, and that's fine too, because again, money should not be a barrier to information. Money is not a barrier to information. You can still do it yourself. The internet has great resources. I mean, clearly. But again, if you can hire a lawyer, do it. AI generated art. Ooh, I don't have a good answer to that, Ty. Don't have a good answer for that. That's outside the realm of my knowledge. But we can talk about that. Okay, so, oh shoot. Sorry, clearly I forgot to type number 2 on the right side there, but I'll talk about it. Requirements for a valid contract. It should be in writing. There are technically certain types of contracts that don't have to be in writing to be enforceable by law, but that gets into the statute of frauds and some really complicated legal crap that I'm not going to talk about today. But I would say in general, best practice, write it down. Technically speaking, one important thing to note is if it's a contract for the sale of goods of more than $500. So if somebody's paying you more than $500 to either purchase your work or to contract you to do work, then you need to have it in writing, because if it's not in writing, it's not legally enforceable, full stop, period. Hang on just a second, y'all. Sorry, that was my mother calling me to make sure that I'm home because it's icing now. So I know we all have that person in our lives. So, okay. So if it's a goods, $500 or more, put it in writing. And again, there's other things that are required to be in writing, but I hope that all of you are selling things for $500 or more. Okay, and contracts should always have the essential terms spelled out exactly. So again, essential terms, this is a legal term of art. There are certain things that are essential terms, and there are things that are, I mean, they're realistically, of course, they're essential terms, but they don't have to be part of the contract to be valid and enforceable necessarily. Courts can do some interpretation, blah, blah, blah. Not getting into that, but again, requirements / best practices here. But price, you definitely have to have price. That is a legally required term. The term of the agreement, like how long is this for, or when does this work need to be completed by? That's also really important, right? Who are the parties? Who is doing it and who is paying for it? And of course, the substance being, what am I doing? What is the thing being sold? And identify it within pretty reasonable means. And that's going to be, pretty important. And cancellation, what are we doing if, let's say we don't complete it in 30 days? How are we going to cancel this contract, right? Is there going to be a fee to cancel the contract? Is there not? Does a separate cancellation agreement, need to be signed? Let's say I did part of the work, I was hired to paint a mural. I did 2/3 of it. Am I getting compensation for the portion I completed? Am I not getting compensation for anything because they have to hire somebody else for even more money to finish it? These are things you can spell out. Most people don't spell out, everything exactly because there's always going to be, unforeseen things. But if you have some basic protections in place, you're going to be better off because, again, if things that happen outside of what you've anticipated in your contract, if you were to go to court, judges and courts are going to interpret things that fall outside of your contract. They're going to try and interpret it within the confines of the contract you did create most of the time. So you can even protect yourself without realizing it. And they should always be signed by both parties, or at least by, it's called the party to be charged, but it's the party who's expected to do something. So me, the artist, I'm, creating this work, I'm the person that has to sign the contract. Again, best practice is for everybody to sign the contract, especially if you're contracting with a business, because the worst thing well, maybe not the worst thing, but a bad thing that can happen is, when somebody contracts you from a business and then maybe that person didn't have the authority to enter into that agreement with you because maybe they were just like some random Joe Blow from the street that's like, yeah, I'm totally from the Arkansas Arts Council, here, sign this contract. You don't want that. So you want to make sure that you're signing your contract with, someone authorized to do it. I assume like Scarlett is probably authorized to sign contracts. Okay, maybe not, but you get my point, guys. So your best practices, again, these things. And if you're doing anything where they're going to use your work, again, more than just personal use, I'm hanging this painting in my home, I'm displaying my sculpture, I'm going to listen to this music, again, I'm selling you a CD at my concert because I'm Monster Boy Lives. This is great. I don't need a contract with every person I sell a CD to, of course. But you do need, you're going to want to put basic copyright release on the back, like we own the copyright to this music. It's always good to let people know. Again, big fan of disclaimers. But again, if you're selling something to somebody and there's a reasonable anticipation that they might want to use it, in the public, again, like selling somebody or doing family photos for somebody, and of course you expect them to post them on social media, but maybe you don't want them, again, selling them to a sock company for their Facebook marketing campaign. You want to spell out exactly what they can do with that work. So if it's a print release, you can reproduce this in print for personal use only, and that's what it is, or a right to reproduce your work, right? So again, the question that was asked earlier, if if somebody hires you to create a work for them, you're going to want to have a contract for all of the things on the left side of this screen, and you're going to spell out, you're going to want to spell out, what's the right to reproduce that. So yeah, I really think that's really the big stuff. Any other questions about contracts? I think I have some more information here, like when you might want a contract. But all right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So when do you want a contract? You want it when you're selling your work. When you're loaning your work out for an exhibition, we haven't talked about this yet. So let's say, I'm gonna give one of my paintings to the Butler Center to show for 6 months as part of this exhibition. Maybe I'm getting paid, maybe I'm not, I don't know. But either way, you're gonna want them to accept the liability for excuse me. You're gonna want them to accept the liability for exhibiting your work. For instance, again, okay, so there's the people going around that are climate activists throwing paint on great works of art, which fortunately are mostly protected by glass. I appreciate the statement, guys. But thankfully they're all protected by glass. But let's say your work's not protected by glass and some climate activist comes in and throws red paint on it, yay environment, and now your work's destroyed. You're gonna probably want that place to compensate you for your work. So you're going to want to have a contract for what does that look like? What if your work is destroyed? Let's say you're shipping your work from Little Rock to Boston. There's going to be some kind of contract you're going to need for who accepts that liability. And there are specific rules on that in the Uniform Commercial Code, but I'm just throwing it out there. Consider having a contract for who is, because if you don't have a contract for things like shipping, then the Uniform Commercial Code is going to control. But you can also contract beyond what the law says. Like, so the law is kind of the default. But if you can contract differently, as long as, again, this is not illegal. So So if you have a performance scheduled, of course, you're going to want a contract for the day and time. I mean, again, that's going to be an essential term of your contract if you are a performing artist of any kind. And you're going to want to discuss, when you can get into the venue and when you can do practice and, and anything else like that. And another big thing about when you're doing things at venues is considering liability there. I see a hand raised.
Oh, we can get to it after you get to the end of this.
Okay.
Okay.
No worries. So, and so anything else with like a performance schedule, I mean, really anything and everything, you want to spell out exactly what the details are. Because then, let's say the contract doesn't say Oregon, maybe in writing, even if let's say we don't put it in writing, but in the contract. But we have text messages where like, oh yeah, also, you can get in at this certain time. If your contract doesn't say it and your contract says that nothing you say outside of this contract, it's called a merger clause. Your contract might say nothing you say outside of this contract is going to be enforceable. They text you that, say, oh yeah, you can get in at this time. Well, then you can't get in at that time. You can't set up in time, and comes your performance time and you're like, I'm not even close to ready. And they're like, oh, you've breached our contract. Well, you said it in this text message. Well, it wasn't in the contract. So you're probably screwed, and you probably breached your own contract without realizing that you were going to breach it. There are a lot of other things that's probably not the best example, but that's a pretty good idea of what we'd be looking at. So pretty much any other time you're being paid to do something, you should have a contract. And when you're working with others, again, for lots of reasons I've already talked about. And when you're licensing images, recordings, et cetera, for specific use, again, print releases, use licenses, you can license your work for lots of things. But they're specific things, right? You want to license them like just for this use at this time by this person for this reason only. You can get really specific, or you can be really broad. The worst thing you can do is give a really broad license, and then people go outside of that. And then it's a question of, well, is it really within the license? Well, it might be, because if it's really broad. Okay. Veronica, did I answer your question? Anything else there?
It's oddly specific, but maybe it'll help somebody in here. We had a different band at one point in time that had a lot of members. It was a rotating cast of members. My husband and I were the only permanent fixtures. And when new people would come in, we would explain how, like, we had a contract that stated everyone, like, music written within the band stayed within the band. If you left, that share went to the next person, because, you don't want to keep dividing the pie. Everybody agreed to it. They also received an email that had that information. So, backing it up in writing. My husband did have a habit of discontinuing use of material that was written by somebody else when they left the band, just as a common courtesy, even though we had the rights to it. So the only material we're discussing is material he wrote himself. We now have interest in that material for sync placement. And I guess my question is because of all the steps we've taken and that we're re-recording the material, so we're not releasing anything that has any other musicians on it. Is that completely in our ballpark? Is there any concern?
That's a really specific one, and my connection wasn't like just perfect through all that. But hang on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, the video is not working for me, so if I'm frozen, I can hear you now. But if nobody contributed to it, and I mean, at the end of the day, an email may not be enough. If they want to come back and say, well, I wrote that material, or I helped write that material, and wanted to try and, shut you down, you might, have problems. So it's not that's not like the best answer at the moment, but without knowing more, I'd hesitate to get too specific there. Okay, you're welcome. All right, a couple more things just to touch on that are just really, I think, important things for everybody to know, and especially for artists. Liability insurance. Okay, so we talked a lot about, you know, getting sued earlier and how to protect ourselves from getting sued, but once in a while we might get sued. And liability insurance is gonna help protect you. So do I need it? No, probably not. But you're gonna want it. When do you need liability insurance? It's pretty much just if somebody requires it requires it of you. Think like your car. Liability insurance on your car. You're required by law to carry that because the state says so. So unless somebody says you have to, you don't have to. But I will say, as a wedding photographer over the years, there are certain venues that require me to carry liability insurance of $1 million or $2 million. Those are that's pretty much gonna be your standard coverage for most people. If you have a larger business, you might want more coverage. If you have a bunch of, you know, employees or contractors working for you or anything like that, you may want more coverage. Or a venue that's exhibiting your work. So for instance, we talked about earlier, let's say your work gets destroyed when it's on display somewhere. The venue may require that you carry liability insurance on your work, or you may contract with them that they carry liability insurance on your work. Either way, you want to make sure that there is something covering that once it's out of your hands. And a common policy that's written together, again, this is just in my personal experience as a photographer, liability and equipment insurance can be written together. And I think that's good for most artists. If you have equipment of any kind, as a sculptor, I mean, like welders, I had welders, they're expensive. You know, we live in the South. I wanted protection just in case they get destroyed by a tornado. You know, I mean, another thing to note though on equipment and insurance is that your homeowner's insurance, if you do own a home, may have a rider for that. So you may want to talk to your insurance agent and see if you can add an equipment rider to your home policy, or it may already have one. It may not cover business equipment, but it's relatively easy to add for most people in most circumstances. And your insurance agent may also be able to help you get a good deal on liability coverage too. There's some good companies out there that do it. If let's say you don't have any of those things, you're like, I don't even have a renter's policy, y'all. There's a couple of companies that really do cater exclusively to small businesses. I used to get mine through Hill and Usher, and they have pretty affordable rates. I don't know, just my experience, but special considerations besides things like equipment. I mean, again, my camera gets broken. I used to use this example a lot as a wedding photographer. Oh gosh, I'm at the wedding. I'm taking photos of the bride and groom. They're all happy, blah, blah, blah. I'm backing up. Whoa, I backed into the wedding cake, knocked it over, ruined the wedding. Yeah, they might want to sue me over that. I could see it. Never happened, but that's where my liability insurance is going to come into play. I don't know exactly what they're going to be able to really get out of me. Let's be real, because what are your damages? You know, the cost of the wedding cake. Pain and suffering, you're probably not going to get that in most courts in Arkansas, unless it's got to be pretty severe. We live in the South. Again, we don't take people's emotions as seriously as some of the northern states and the northern courts. But either way, you might have some damages there. So let's say the cake is $800. Maybe they might be able to sue me for $2,000 in small claims court, and they might win. My liability insurance is going to pay that judgment for me and less my deductible, whatever that is. Just like when you get your car broken, or broken car, you get a car wreck or something. And then, yeah, so I mentioned this one, like celebrities definitely insure their body. Not all of them. I don't know how many people actually do this, but I know this is a thing. But let's say if you're a dancer and you earn your income, exclusively from dancing, like you might be one of those people that could, do things like insure yourself. in such a way. You could also look into things like short-term disability and long-term disability coverage that can be paid for yourself outside of a company. Lots of companies that people work for provide that type of coverage. But really, you get hurt on the job as an independent, dancer. There's no workers' comp that's going to cover you, right? So you can look into liability coverage to help you. Injuries to others, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier too. But let's say, you're my brother's heavy metal band, right? Anybody ever been to a metal concert? There's a mosh pit right at the front, and you go in the mosh pit, you're probably assuming the risk of getting hit in the face. I remember when I was 16, I got in a mosh pit and I got picked up by my belt, my studded belt. Let's be clear, my studded belt, and thrown across the room. And I whacked my face into a pole at the old Juanita's. I probably assumed that risk. Thankfully, I was not hurt, in any serious way. But had I been, let's say I got whacked into that pole and I got a brain injury and I went into a coma and never came out. I'm gonna knock on some wood over here. But my parents might have wanted to sue the band that was playing, the venue where it was at, and of course the person who threw me. And Astro World, that's another good example. If everybody's familiar with the horrific events at the Astro World Festival a couple of years ago, a couple people got trampled and died. They're getting sued, and so is the band that was performing when all of this happened. And if you're the band and let's say you've employed security guards, or it was your responsibility under the contract with the venue to these are all really important considerations when you're just performing in the world. Or again, you're my brother's metal band, you try to perform a trick where you throw your guitar around, and it flies off because your strap was broken and it hits someone in the face. And they need corrective surgery because you broke their nose. That's pretty negligent. There's probably no assumption of the risk there. So you might get sued and you might be liable. So
With the Astro, I'm sorry, my brain just glitched and I want to say turf, but that's not right.
Astro World.
Go back over that a little bit, just as it popped. Yeah, no, okay.
Hang on,
I'm
my
not
internet-
sure what
my
the question was. Veronica wanted to.
my connection got bad. Can y'all hear me okay now? What was the last thing you heard?
I could hear you okay. You were just talking about Astro World and that the band was being sued and the venue was being sued, and then it sort of just
Oh,
paused.
the only other thing I mentioned was, so again, using my brother's metal band as an example, let's say he does that trick where, he's playing the guitar and he throws it around him, around the world, and it flies off of the guitar strap, right? And it goes in the audience and hits someone in the face. I'm that person in the audience, I get hit in the face, I get my nose broken, I need plastic surgery to fix it, I'm probably going to sue you. So you're going to want coverage for that. You're going to want to protect yourself. Did that all come through?
Oh, are you paused again? I can't tell. Welcome to Zoom.
I'm back. Sorry,
Okay.
I only have about 4 slides left too, so we're at the Did y'all hear my little anecdote about my brother and the guitar
Yes.
throwing and the hitting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I hope the point came across. I hope
Will
the
there,
point came across.
will there be enough time for a couple of questions at the end, you think?
Absolutely. I thought I had till 2, right?
Yeah, I just, 4 slides in, so. And I have a
No,
question.
oh, you're good.
It's all about me.
My last 4 are really short. Okay, let me share back. Okay. So back on insurance, just briefly, if you have a brick and mortar business of any kind where maybe you're a gallery owner or you are a maker and you sell your products, you might want premises liability insurance. So if somebody slips and falls and hurts themselves, that you might be liable there, and you have some coverage. And event insurance. So again, let's say you have a group gallery show and you have a big opening event. Event insurance is really cheap, like $120 for an event to cover pretty much everything, again, except for just gross negligence, like you really, really, really messed up. So that's really useful. Okay, I'm gonna get into what if I get divorced and what if I die now, and that's the end of what we're gonna talk about. So I'm an artist, I have works, and I'm getting divorced. So what is gonna happen to my work? So your artistic works might be divisible property in the event of divorce. Depends a lot on when you made it. And if you made it prior to the marriage, it's probably separate property that's not going to be divisible in the divorce, and you probably are going to get to keep that and have to, do nothing as far as your divorcing spouse is concerned. However, if it's something you made during the marriage and it's valuable, it's probably marital property and it's going to be subject to division. Now, what division looks like in a divorce is not always like, here, you can keep half my paintings. It might be that you, pay them half the value of your work as part of a settlement. Appropriate valuation is going to be needed, depending on whether the works, again, if you're a sole proprietor, and all of your assets is just your work, then, we're probably looking at just the value of the work itself. But if you actually, have a business entity, which again is still going to be your best bet, there may be a different valuation for your actual business that is going to be maybe more than just the value of your work, right? You have the value of your goodwill with people. Let's say you have regular buyers. You have industry connections, whatever your business is worth. So there are people that are professionally paid a lot of money to value businesses in the event of divorce. And a good divorce lawyer, I deal with this kind of thing all the time. Not saying I'm the best. There are definitely divorce lawyers that deal with more things like this than I do. But having a good divorce lawyer will help you navigate this. Another thing to know is that it might be best to just, sell things. I mean, again, lots of people get divorced. They're like, oh, let's just sell the house. And just split the profits. And sometimes people decide to have estate sales and things like that. And that might be best. You might also want to consider not making any more work until your divorce is final. But again, good divorce lawyer will walk you through these things. If you're worried, get a prenup. Prenups are great. You can also have a postnup. I didn't put that on this slide, but a postnuptial agreement is also actually totally a thing. Let's say you get married and maybe things have been like maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to become a really successful artist. So either you could always tell your spouse, hey, I want you to sign a postnuptial agreement agreeing that all of my work is my separate property in the case we get divorced. Now, I'm not going to say that's probably going to help the marriage, but it is legally available to you. So, and a good divorce lawyer is going to help you with a prenup or a postnup there. So, maybe y'all agree, and maybe they have things they want to protect too. And that's usually going to be the the best way to approach it if you, anyway, but I won't tell you how to do that. Okay, and what if I die? And I mean, we're all gonna die, but eventually, hopefully not today. So you're gonna wanna protect your stuff in advance. Get a will, see a lawyer. Don't assume this is a big mistake that people make, and then people come and they're like, oh yeah, they did this will on LegalZoom. And I'm like, yeah, well, they left out like half their crap. And now there's like no provision for what to do with any of this stuff. And now we're gonna have to get into a complicated probate case, and this is gonna drag out for 3 years. So don't do it unless you have a really, really simple estate. Let's be very clear. If you don't own a dang thing, and the only thing you have is like, I'm like, I have like 4 guitars. I just want my friend Becky to have them. You could probably do a LegalZoom will. I mean, okay. But wills have to be in writing. They are one of the types of contracts that has to be in writing to be enforceable. Has to be signed by the person that's, you know, doing the will. Has to be witnessed and signed by 2 disinterested parties, which are people that will not take from the will. So if I'm leaving my guitars to Becky, Becky cannot be one of the witnesses to my will. Or any of my kids. Let's say I have kids. I don't have kids, but if I did, they can't be a witness. And you're going to have to include specific language of devise. So if you want specific things to go to specific people, unfortunately, wills are not great for devising specific things to specific people, because most of the time that type of property, it changes over time. So I can say my 2020 Subaru Outback to my daughter, Chelsea. I don't have a daughter named Chelsea, just so you know. But if I die 20 years from now, and now I've got a 2034 Subaru Outback because Sub Squad for life, that specific devise is no longer valid. And my daughter Chelsea is not going to get my 2034 Subaru Outback just because it said she could have the old one, because it's different. So if you have a bunch of artistic work, especially that you want to go to specific people, you should probably make a trust. And trusts are really, really great. And your will can just say, hey, when I die, all of my stuff gets distributed according to my trust. Now, trust property can be much more vague. We can say all my cars, or all of my original works, or my original works made from this date to this date, or this numbered piece to this number. I mean, you can get really, really specific or be really, really general. And you can just do a lot more with the trust than you can with the will. And then the best part is that then none of your family and friends have to deal with a lengthy court battle over your stuff or your money. And, you know, especially when you have, you know, artistic works. Come on, everybody knows about, you know, Vincent van Gogh. He didn't get famous till after he died. And, you know, I don't know about Vincent van Gogh. It's just for our purposes, you know, Vincent van Gogh dies without a will. You know, who gets the rights to his work over time? Is it the person that bought it from him at the roadside stand for $5? Or should it have been his heirs? You know, should his family not benefit from his work that became famous posthumously? So that is, no, I have one more slide about freedom of speech. This just came to me at the end today when I was making this. So anything you make as an artist is speech. It's not just words that come out of your mouth. It's work you create. It's work you put on paper. It's music you record. It's any kind of shit you put out into the world is speech. And freedom of speech is great. The First Amendment protects us. But the First Amendment protects us only from intrusion by the government. The government can't tell you what kind of art you can and can't make, right? We don't live in Iran. We can't be put in jail. This is the best example I know. In America, we can't be put in jail for creating a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad, which of course is against Islamic law, right? We can't be jailed for that. But we can be screwed by the public, and anything you say, well protected under the First Amendment, you can't protect yourself from the court of public opinion. So be careful, y'all. That is the end of my presentation. Questions?
I have two questions. The first one is related to this. I think you can still get in trouble for obscenity, like as far as freedom of speech and visuals, that can still get you into trouble. I think. Are you frozen? Okay, well, I guess I'll just keep talking. I'll just see if she comes back like a zombie, a virtual zombie. Because the other question I had was about memoir or creative nonfiction writing, whether you had to actually get people to sign off on your work. Do any of y'all know? Okay. Y'all just gonna let me like drown out here. That's
No, I don't know. I don't. That's very interesting though.
fine.
I feel sad that you're talking to yourself so high.
Thank you.
I don't know, but that's a really, really interesting question.
Thanks.
I was just gonna let you roll.
I'm not.
You're just gonna let me go. I'm like, oh my God, I'm just babbling to myself. And they're like, meh.
We're actually all off making a cup of tea and just like no one's actually here behind the lack of those things.
I've had so much tea because it's sleeting outside.
Mhm.
Back.
Oh, good. Yay!
I'm sorry. Okay, questions. Sorry. Go.
I had to. Can't you still get in trouble for obscenity when it comes to freedom of speech?
So obscenity is so you walk a fine line with obscenity and of course, okay, so right, freedom of speech is not absolute, right? So obscenity, like it depends, like I mean, again, like if you're showing your ass 10 feet from a daycare, you're gonna get arrested, right? You probably can't do a performance art piece again where you get naked 10 feet from a daycare. Okay, so obvious things aside, I mean, obscenity, I mean, whatever. I mean, you're pretty much restricted by the platforms in which you choose to share your work there. So other than that, you're probably cool. And also things like incitement to violence, that's not protected. Like you can't rile up a mob to go attack the Capitol.
Oh, I knew you were gonna do it. I was like, don't go, don't do it. And you just did.
Had to.
Okay, so I have another question while I have the full floor. Creative nonfiction or memoir writing, do you have to get the people you're talking about signature in order to move forward on publication like that?
If they're not contributing to it and you're not defaming them, no.
Okay.
I mean, if you're just writing a biography of a person based on publicly available information, you don't need anybody's permission to do that.
Or what about a memoir? It's more like your story, and it could,
You're writing you mean writing your own memoir?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're writing your own memoir, you're writing your own memoir.
And you
Maybe I
wouldn't
misunderstood your question.
Yeah, well, if you're writing your own memoir, you don't need like to go to the people who are around you and get their signatures.
No, if you're writing about things that they told you, unless you have a contract with them that says you won't speak about that, that's called a non-disclosure agreement. And you're really gonna know if you sign that.
Okay.
So, no,
Okay.
you're good.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions?
I do have a question if nobody else does.
Go for it.
So just like a brief overview. And so not talking about like Razorback stuff, because I know the answer there, but like using logos or brands in artwork, using like public buildings in artwork, and then celebrity likenesses, considering most of the photos are going to be photos that somebody else took. So how do you kind of approach those things?
Sorry, it cut out just a second. Do you mind repeating your question?
Yeah. So ignoring the Razorback copyright, I understand the answer there. But like I've seen artists use like logos of other, like a Chanel perfume bottle. I've seen that a lot in artwork. I've seen, celebrities depicted in artwork that are from photograph. Those two situations, I don't know the answer on the Chanel, but in the celebrity likeness, do you have to take the photograph yourself, or how are people painting celebrities?
So painting a photo, right? I mean, it depends on like how different is it, right? So for instance, like you're selling a work and so like the Andy Warhol, like Prince lawsuit, right? So like Prince's photo was like a specific photo of Prince that they basically just completely reproduced just right on the page, in his artistic style. That's probably just not different enough. If you're doing a painting of a photo of a person, let's say the photo is, it may be copyrighted, it may be public domain. If it's different enough, you're probably okay. I mean, I've seen people do work where they like toss in a bunch of like logos of random, companies to create art. Again, you're probably looking at public domain there. So it's probably not an issue for you to use it. But yeah, exactly. Media law is very, very complicated.
Okay,
So-
thank you. So just kind of, if I need more answers, find a media lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna want, well, an intellectual property lawyer is
Yeah.
gonna cover all that for sure.
And then public buildings.
What about them?
I mean, is every public building in general something that you can include in artwork, or are there certain situations where you have to get permission?
Oh, well, so buildings are totally different. I mean, a building, you can't, copy, I don't know, buildings, architecture, all that, that's really different. I mean, you're painting buildings, It's definitely, I mean, I don't know that it's public domain, but I mean, it's buildings, y'all. I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
If you are, I mean, I remember there was someone that had a problem with a photo of their restaurant, not being taken and then sold as coasters locally here, and they didn't like that, but I don't think they were able to sue. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? We have 5 whole minutes left. Cool. I'm really excited that after not practicing that presentation, I did it in exactly the right amount of time that I was expected to. And I appreciate you all being here. And for real, if you have any questions, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. And you're welcome to reach out to me. If I can't help you, I can direct you to somebody who can. So thank you for having me, Scarlett.
Oh no, thank you for being here. I've dropped my email in here too. If you guys do want to save the chat, you can do that by clicking on the 3 little dot buttons. It looks like, someone's sort of thinking beside the smiley face, and it will give you an option to save the chat. And, later this week, I'll send out a link to this so you can review the video and the PowerPoint presentation. Also, I guess just thank you guys for being here, and have a great rest of Tuesday. Stay warm.
Stay warm and safe, y'all.
Yeah. Goodbye.